Hello and welcome. The success of the telecom and IT convergence effort in this country is going to depend on many things. One of them is what the government of India is doing to build the infrastructure, to connect things and to deliver services and benefits to the hundreds of millions of Indians. One of the people who's working very hard to ensure that happens in this lifetime is Milind Deora, Minister of State for IT, Telecom and Shipping. And we're going to really talk about your interest in the IT and telecom side. So Milind, first of all, let's start with the more fundamental question. Where is the infrastructure headed and what's the status today?
The infrastructure today is, we still need to sort of build the backhaul infrastructure, which is the core of any distribution network anywhere in the country. What we are looking at it, the way we are looking at it in the government is, we've seen how the voice revolution took off in India. Today in the country, just about 7 years ago, 5 years ago, we had about 18% as a teledensity rate. Today it's about 80%. It's largely urban centric, where we have about 150% of teledensity. So rural areas still haven't got basic telecommunication services. We are going into rural areas through the USO fund, but companies and industries still don't find it as attractive to target rural subscribers as they do for urban areas. We understand in government that the next big thing has to be the data revolution, and we have to build that core infrastructure. But unlike what happened in voice, which was largely rolled out by the private sector, BSNL and MTNL, the state-owned companies, had a role to play. We don't want to repeat that same mistake in the data revolution. And therefore,
what do you call that a mistake?
Well, I think it's a mistake because I don't think at that time, in hindsight, it's easy to say we should have done something different. But at the time, maybe a decade or so ago, we didn't know how people would move, which area would sort of embrace wireless telephony. We didn't even know whether people would embrace wireless telephony at the rate at which they've embraced it, because today it accounts for a majority of telephone connections as compared to wireline. So in the data space, we want this revolution to really be led and powered by rural areas. And for that, what we've done in the Ministry of Communications and IT is we've taken surplus money from the USO fund, and we are investing that money to build a fiber optic network that will connect all of our village panchayats, and that we believe is really like building a 10-lane highway across the country. Eventually that will be a non-discriminatory network that will allow industry to come on board, utilize that backhaul infrastructure for last mile connectivity. I don't think any country in the world knows whether last mile connectivity will be purely wireless, whether it will be wireline or it will be a mix of the two. We in India certainly don't know, because there are different constraints, geographical and demographic in India. But we want to sort of build this infrastructure, and India often gets accused of not building infrastructure in time and then doing it reactively. Here we want to proactively say that we've built this, actually it's not even a 10-lane highway, it's an infinite lane highway, to connect all of the village panchayats in the country.
So where do we stand today?
Well, we stand today where we've got a committee which is led by Mr. Pitroda and by Nandan Nilekani. We formed a public sector company called Bharat Broadband Networks Limited, and we are really trying to first map out what already exists in the country, because there are many companies, especially PSUs, who laid out fiber optical connectivity. Back in the day, the railways created RailTel, Power Grid Corporation created a fiber optical network, GAIL created GailTel, BSNL has its own network, the private sector has its own network. So first we need to map out what already exists. Where do we go out and add that incremental layer of connectivity? So it's in the process. It's something I think will happen quite soon, and we are making the resources available for it in terms of monies. And once that happens, I think you will then start to see applications, local entrepreneurship developing at a village and panchayat level.
So, a lot of Gen Y audiences must be watching this or will watch this. How is this going to help them in your mind?
Well,
wherever, not necessarily urban. I mean, this could be rural as well.
Well, the aim is not to build this infrastructure and use taxpayers' money to give people access to entertainment content. We're not saying you shouldn't access entertainment content, but it's primarily at our level, what we think government will provide content is e-governance. So it will primarily aid our e-governance efforts. For that, we also need to bring more government data online and make it converted into electronic form, which is also in process. But eventually it's for making education available to people in villages, to make telemedicine a reality. It hasn't really worked anywhere in the world, not because the application side or the content side isn't available. It's largely because the infrastructure isn't there in the rural areas. So we want to actually go out and do this first in the world, where we are actually building this infrastructure, and we are sure then that content providers, application providers will come on board. But by and large, it's to provide utilitarian services to people in cities or in rural areas.
Right, so one of the areas, and I'll come back to the infrastructure point, is content, right? And there's a lot of concern sometimes that while government is building infrastructure, allowing the creation of content, flow of content, there's also a clamping down on content, right? And there seems to be in some ways a contradiction between the two.
Not at all. I mean, you actually answered my question, because if we are rolling out this massive distribution network, which is actually going to bring millions of people onto the internet and onto high-speed internet, we wouldn't be wanting to do that and at the same time regulate or clamp down on content. So I think what happened in the last year or so with regards to the regulation of content was grossly blown out of proportion, and things have come down to a stage now where people understand that we're not doing anything different from what the world is doing. The internet, unlike the print medium or even the television medium, is a global medium, and we have to have rules and regulations and laws that are in tune with what exists globally. With regards to 66A, for example, which is an important section in the IT Act, the wordings of that are not at all different from what exists in the US, Europe, and other developed telecom economies. So we have absolutely no intention to curb content, clamp down on content, or even regulate content and even decide whether this content is good or bad. That's not our business as the government. And I myself, as a minister in this department, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. I wouldn't be on these platforms and using social media so aggressively.
So you must be getting slammed a lot. So how does it feel then?
Well, as I said, that's part of the political domain, which you deal with it the way you deal with a political attack. But purely from a legal perspective and purely from a perspective of what your intent is, the intent is to get many more people onto the internet, and as I said, bring in this data revolution. Sadly, we haven't been able to do that as well as we've done in voice. So voice is a great success story, but we haven't replicated that on the internet. And we want more people to come on the net. We want more people to feel comfortable using the net. I want more younger people to embrace the net, to use it to communicate with their friends, to share information, to share music, to share photographs, to even go to rural areas and actually help people fix, get access to markets in rural areas, to actually fix educational problems in rural areas, to actually improve e-governance in those areas. So there's no way that we want to regulate content. We've only created an enabling provision which is in tune with what exists anywhere in the world, that if you defame me online, just like you defame me offline, the same provisions should exist. That's my duty. I can't leave the internet ungovernable as a lawless place. I can't say that it's unfair for you to defame someone offline, but you can do whatever you want online. That's not the way it works anywhere in the world.
Right. So let me come back to the earlier question now, or the larger infrastructure question. What's your, when you think of, let's say, in India which is connected, is there an image or is there an experience, maybe correlating it with some other part of the world? What comes to your mind, and if you can paint us a picture?
We talk a lot about some of the most developed telecom economies in the world, which are Scandinavian economies, even the United States, of course, South Korea and Japan. But frankly, I still haven't found a economy or a country where a government has such an ambitious plan to take utilitarian services to the people. And in that sense, it's an experiment that we're undertaking. We don't have a clear model of where telemedicine has worked. We don't have a clear model that exists anywhere in the world of where online education has really worked and empowered people at the lowest strata of society. So we are actually going in for a massive experiment. But to me, the way I look at this ecosystem is that exists anywhere in the world actually comprises of three things. It's the distribution network and hard infrastructure, it's the customer premise equipment, and it's the content. I really believe that the content will fix itself, and entrepreneurs will come around to fix applications that are regionalized in different languages in India and that can reach out to people from rural areas to cities. I'm also convinced with this distribution network, the cost of customer premise equipment will go down. What will that customer premise equipment be? I don't know again, and nobody knows. Will it be a handheld? Will it be a projection on a wall in a village? Will it be a kiosk? But I believe that with more data being moved to the cloud, you don't need GBs and GBs of storage capacity. So that should bring the customer premise equipment cost down. But the core area that is a variable that we can't afford to ignore, and we can't just depend on the private sector and market dynamics, is the distribution network. So we're actually looking at it from that model, that we don't know what really exists around the world. We don't know how we can take government services to the citizens of India, especially rural areas. But let's try and build that 20-lane highway that connects India. Whether the car will be a small compact hybrid car, whether it will be an electric car, whether it will be an SUV which guzzles a lot of fuel, that's for market dynamics and tastes and preferences to figure out.
So last question, what's the one app or application that you would want to see which you think would help people, and or maybe for fun or for utility?
I really think that e-governance is very powerful. I think that because in India in the last year or so we've spoken a lot about how do we prevent corruption at a local level, and different people have thrown up different solutions. The most prominent of those solutions is a bill which is in Parliament now, which seeks to create a layer of bureaucrats that will make sure that the existing government machinery is doing their job in a fair manner. If you ask me very frankly, to me, I don't know if another additional layer of bureaucrats will keep a check on the existing layer of bureaucrats. I would say if we can remove that existing layer of bureaucrats and reduce that interface between people and the government, that will eliminate everyday corruption. So for me, the game-changing innovation is e-governance, and I think that will really address not just corruption issues, but make sure people feel more, have a greater stake in government, and it'll actually transform, and it won't just be a discussion point at seminars, but it'll actually make India a participatory democracy.
We've run out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's a very optimistic note to end as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Govind.